So as Elvira mentioned, my name's James Stovold. I am the teaching lead and program lead for one of the MSc programs in computer science here. I've been asked just to give you sort of an overview of the different programs we have at computer science in Leipzig. What I'm going to do is basically give you a quick overview of what the different styles of programs are and the differences between them at a fairly high level, just because I know that some people won't have that kind of knowledge already, and then dig into some of the details of the two programs which we are introducing at master's level in autumn this year. My background is more towards the data science side of things, which is the program which I am the program director for, which means that when I'm talking about cybersecurity, there may be a little bit less detail just because it's not my area of expertise. So hopefully you'll forgive me if I skim over some of the details in there. But if you have any questions, feel free to send them through afterwards via email. My email address is on the front slide here. And if it's more on the cybersecurity side, I can pass you across to the relevant person within the department who will be able to answer more technical questions if necessary. So let's jump in. To start with, I am running on the assumption that everybody here has a bachelor's degree. So a bachelor's degree, or typically in the sciences, this is a BSc, a Bachelor's of Science. This is your undergraduate degree. This is typically the first degree which people take. And generally, the aim of your bachelor's degree is to give a fairly broad introduction to a topic. So, for example, in my background, my undergraduate degree was in computer science, and that's a fairly broad overview of computer science. I did some in AI, I did some in data science, I did some in theory, I did some in hardware, but I wasn't focused in on any one of those areas. The idea is to give an introduction to the general field so that you can make a decision about where you want to go afterwards. You're now, I assume anyway, at the stage where you've completed your bachelor's or are about to complete your bachelor's and are looking at different ways in which you can specialize. And that's where your master's programs come in. Typically in the sciences, these will be an MSc, a Master's of Science. And these are actually split into different styles of masters as well. The ones we're going to focus on today are what we call taught master's programs. That means that they are run in a fairly similar way to the bachelor's, where you have lectures, you have labs, you are there being taught the material. And then the alternative to that is a research master's or an MSc by research, which is kind of like a mini PhD where you do 1 year of just research guided by an academic, but without the taught component. All of the ones we're talking about today are taught master's programs, okay? The other postgraduate degree you may see around, which is a bit more advanced, is a doctorate or a PhD. This is then 3 to 4 years of self-study focused on one question and one research problem. Most people will do a master's before they go on to PhD, but this is also something which you may be thinking about after you have specialized in your master's if you want to go into something like academia or into industrial research. In October of 2024, so that's in about 4 or 5 months' time, we are introducing taught masters and a PhD program at Leipzig. The two programs we're introducing for MSc within computer science are the cybersecurity masters and the data science masters. And there are some strange differences between them, which I'll get onto a little bit in terms of how we actually teach them. But we'll come on to that towards the end after we've had a look at some of the content within them. Generally speaking, your bachelor's would probably have been either 3 years or 4 years, depending on the system which you have come through, which education system you've come through. Within the British system, we have 120 credits per year. So that's typically over 9 months of the year, and then there's a break over the summer. The MSc within the British system is 12 months of study. So that means that you have the 9 months of typical taught material, much like in 1 year of the bachelor's, and then you have a 60 credit research project over the summer. This is in contrast to some of the other higher education systems where maybe you have a 2-year master's program where you spend 1 year focused on the taught part and 1 year focused on a project. In the British system, it's all done within 12 months, and that equates to 180 credits in our system, which gives you an idea of where that extra 60 credits comes from compared with the 9 months per year of the bachelor's program. So let's start having a look at some of the more detailed stuff here. So this hopefully has given you a rough idea of the differences between a bachelor's and a master's and where they kind of sit in terms of the content. Basically you're slowly narrowing down your field until you basically become a master of your field, which is the idea behind your master's program. When you then get onto something like a PhD is when you're actually trying to advance the field. So you're actually contributing to the field rather than just learning from it. So we have lots of modules in these taught programs. If we start off talking about the cybersecurity one, mostly because I know less about cybersecurity than I do data science, we have a list of modules which you see here. We can basically ignore the codes on the left. They're just our internal codes for each of the modules. There's lots of different topics here. Cybersecurity Masters at Lancaster has been designed with a very well-rounded perspective on cybersecurity. So security as a whole is about how do we make sure only the right people can access something, okay? Specifically with cybersecurity, you're focused on the technical aspects of that, but that can also include things like making sure the door is locked and not giving away your information to somebody if you don't know who they are. And so the master's program has a range of different styles of modules. The top three here, so your network and system security, your pen testing, and your digital forensics, these are the highly technical modules. These are the ones where you will be learning about how routers handle packets when there's an attacker, how to do a variety of testing on a system to make sure that hackers can't get in. And you'll learn hacking skills in order to do that so you can test it yourself. And then digital forensics there is all about how do you then, if something has happened, if something has gone wrong, how do you gather information forensically in such a way that it can then be upheld in a court of law? So these three modules are really highly technical modules, and they form the basis of more of the, I guess, more of the computer sciencey side of things. We then have 2 or 3 modules in the middle here. So we have our 2 information systems ones, so security management and risk management. These are slightly softer modules in terms of the skills required, but actually are looking at a much broader picture. So for example, security management is looking at things like business continuity. So if you're working for a company, and how do you make sure that when something goes wrong, you have some attack which has happened, some data has been leaked, how do you manage that? So it's an essential aspect of cybersecurity, but not focused on the technical side, more focused on what happens when something goes wrong. Your risk management is kind of the other side of that, of how do we quantify risk? How do we assess that risk within a system? Where are there likely to be issues and the likelihood of those issues happening so that we can determine where to best put our resources? So these 2 are then, again, not as technical, but they require a good, thorough understanding of the system, of an IT system or of a technical system. And then we have 3 modules down the bottom here, our security and conflict in the digital age, cyber crime, and introduction to law. So I mentioned before about digital forensics that sometimes when stuff goes wrong, you have to gather evidence and present it to a court of law. Part of what you need to understand is what is the law? Okay, what is the law around security, around cyber crime? So introduction to law here is a basic introduction to the EU legal system, specifically around cybersecurity. We then have cyber crime, which is more of actually a social view of crime within the cyberspace. So that's looking at, I don't know, in what scenarios is something considered a crime and when is it not, but not from a legal perspective, but from a social perspective. And then finally, we have more of a slightly softer view of security, looking in general across society. Security and conflict in the digital age is looking at how society interacts with security and cyber systems and how these things come about, and a variety of interesting things around there, which, if I'm honest, I'm getting to the end of my information and my knowledge of cybersecurity at this point because it's really not my area. But some super interesting stuff in there, which, again, if you're interested, ping me an email and I can always pull up some more information on it and run you through that or pass you to the relevant person. So these are the taught modules. In the MSc Cybersecurity, these taught modules are all core modules. So you are required to take all of these. There's no options there. You don't get to pick and choose. And they have been picked because they center around the general idea of cybersecurity to give a very well-rounded view of cybersecurity. After that 9-month period of teaching, where you've done all of these modules, you will then do your dissertation. So that is then a 3-month research project, either based on research interests within the department or based with a company where you're then working on projects within that company. At the end of that, you will have to write up a dissertation. This is usually in the order of 20,000 words, 20 to 30,000 word dissertation, which you then submit, and then it's marked, and that contributes kind of the capstone of your master's program. Excuse me. So that's the cybersecurity masters in a nutshell. If we jump forward to the data science masters, which I have a little bit more information of in my brain, in the data science masters, it's structured slightly differently. So we have 5 core modules within data science. So data science, what we're focused on really is how do we use statistics and probability to answer scientific questions, and how do we answer scientific questions about statistics, probabilistic data. So if we have billions and billions, trillions of data points where we've measured, I don't know, the heartbeat of everybody in a country for 3 years straight, okay? We're talking trillions of data points there. How can we extract meaningful information out of that? So that's the core idea of data science, and how can we do that in a rigorous way, which allows us to trust the data and the results which we actually get out of it. What we're doing here is, for the MSc Data Science, we're looking at building up your basic understanding of statistics and building up your programming skills. So as an entry requirement for the data science masters, you either need to be a reasonably competent computer scientist, good at programming, something like that, or you have to be good at statistics, but maybe lacking in the programming side of things, and we will teach you the other skill. Okay, so if you have really good programming skills, but you're not very good at statistics, we will teach you the statistics, and that'll be more of a challenge for you, and vice versa. So that's kind of reflected in these core modules, where we have 2 maths modules at the start here, 403 and 404, which are statistical foundations and statistical learning. So these are taught right at the start. As soon as you come in, straight through the gate, we're teaching you the basics of how statistics work. How does probability and statistics work from a mathematical standpoint? And how do we go about learning about the world statistically? Okay, and this forms really the foundation of things like machine learning and neural networks, which are statistical machines, essentially. We then go on to things like data mining, which is where I mentioned before, this idea of having trillions of data points. Well, sometimes we want to just mine that data. Like you would mine in the ground to look for gold, for example. Well, we can mine through trillions of data points to find interesting features about that data. Things which are relevant to whatever business problem we're looking at or research problem we're looking at, where maybe we want to identify, let's say, take our example of the heart rate. Let's say we wanted to identify someone who is likely to have a heart attack. Could we detect anomalies? Well, data mining, those techniques will teach you how to do that, okay? It's typically using something called unsupervised learning techniques, which are then built on the statistical learning stuff which you learn in 404. So lots of clustering and lots of interesting information which you can extract from data there. We then have 460, which is our data science fundamentals. This is looking at the general process of how to run a data science project. So everything from how do you make sure you're getting good data, through to how do you manage that data, get it into the right format in order to be able to answer a reasonable research question, a reasonable scientific question. And then finally, we have this 461, programming for data scientists. This is teaching 2 languages, Python and R, specifically for data science problems. So some of you may have already had some experience, more likely with Python than with R. R is a really nice language for statistics because it's built on a statistical engine. Okay, so everything is about stats, which makes it very, very nice to work with if you're working within a statistical system. So these 5 modules are the core modules, and these are all taught in sort of autumn, the first term of teaching within the data science masters. In the second term, so this is after basically Christmas, you get to pick 3 out of these 4 options. So you have a bit more choice when it comes to the data science masters. So 413, applied data mining. So this is then taking your ideas of data mining, where we were mining through lots and lots of data to find interesting features, interesting clusters, and applying it to real problems. So how do we actually do that for problems rather than just looking at the techniques in general? Then we have 411, building big data systems. Well, this module is all about, let's say we have our trillion data points. How do we build a computer system which can handle that? How do we handle that much data in a system when we can't hold all of the data in memory? How can we do things like streaming from disk to 25 clusters of processors? How do we handle GPUs and how they will interact in order to do this kind of analysis at scale? So that's very, very computer science, really very technical, focused on how we're actually building these kinds of computers and these kinds of systems. In contrast to that, we then have two modules which are actually based around management science. So this is then looking at, so intelligent data analysis and visualization is all about how do you present data to a business partner, for example. So back when I worked in industry as a data scientist, I would regularly have to produce reports for the CEO of the company. And the CEO of the company, well, he was an engineer, but he wasn't a data scientist. So how do I get, these trillion data points with lots of interesting analysis, lots of interesting statistics involved? How do I get that down into a style, into a graph, like a single graph with maybe one line on it, which anybody can understand? And that's a really challenging problem and involves some clever techniques to make sure we're putting the right stuff on the page in front of the right people. And then we have optimization and heuristics, the last taught module or option. This is about how do we go about solving problems that are incredibly difficult. So in general, a lot of problems in the world, we don't need an exact solution to. We can use what's called a heuristic. Now, a heuristic is basically a good enough guess. Most of the time, this will be fine. If you think about a good example is travel. So if you're using something like Google Maps, you want to get from A to B. Well, if you haven't got the exact perfect route, which is the most efficient, and you maybe get there 30 seconds later, it's fine. It's not the end of the world. That's a heuristic approach to things. We don't care about having the absolute pinnacle, the best possible thing. What matters is just that we get something reasonably good. And ideally, we can do that much quicker than finding what we call the global optimum. So optimization and heuristics is looking at that kind of problem of, if you have a problem which can be optimized using these techniques, how do we go about doing that? And again, that feeds quite nicely into a lot of the stuff which actually you would have learned in the first term, because the techniques which we teach you, actually, when they're applied at scale, things like neural networks, they are optimization problems, okay? They are not just pen and paper exercises. When we're running them at scale, when we have 10,000 neurons in our neural network, that's an optimization problem to work out how to actually train that system. And so that's what that's going to be looking at, really focused on how do we get good enough solutions out of any particular problem. So that's then the 9 months of teaching. And then towards the end of that, you will then do a dissertation, much like with the cybersecurity dissertation, which goes over the summer. Again, can either be within the research community, within the university here, and that would span across both computer science and the management school, which we have here, depending on the interests of the student. And then the other option is for essentially an industry project where you're working with real data from real people, from companies in the local area. Broadly speaking, those are the two master's programs. I appreciate that was kind of a very quick run through of lots of information quite quickly, and generally going through this, the best way I find to do it is to open up to questions quite early on. One of the other differences which I wanted to sort of highlight quickly is that these two masters are taught in a different way. So the data science masters is taught in what we call semester taught modules or term taught modules. This is the traditional model of how we teach at universities, the same you would have had a bachelor's, where you turn up at the beginning, you get maybe 10 weeks of taught material, and then you maybe do an assessment and an exam at the end of the year. That's the same in the data science masters. In the cybersecurity masters, we run things a little bit differently. So we do what's called block taught teaching. What that means is you do one module at a time. You are focused for maybe 1 to 2 weeks on that one module and nothing else. You do it all week for that period. You then stop, you do an assessment, and then you go to the next module. What this means is, while it's more intense, it allows you to really immerse yourself within that subject. And the other good thing about it is, because this is quite a broad range of topics, it allows us to bring in experts within the field who maybe are working in industry. It allows us to bring somebody in, let's say, for example, Introduction to Law is a really good example. We're not lawyers. We're not the best person to teach that. So we have found a lawyer who is an expert in this area and are bringing them in to teach that module because it's only for a week, maybe 2 weeks. I can't remember off the top of my head. So that's a really, really good way of then exposing you to real experts within the field beyond the academic department we're working in, people who are actually working in industry in these areas, which can give you much better insights into how it's applied outside of the walls of a university. Data science has worked a little differently just because it's been around for a lot longer, and the content is actually a lot more similar to itself than cybersecurity, which is much more what we call interdisciplinary. But that's that. So that's broadly speaking what I had planned here. I'm quite happy just to sit here and answer questions, and as many as you guys have. So feel free to ping them across. I don't know what approach you guys are using for asking questions here, but I will pass over to
me, it's me. Yes. Thank you very much, James. That was so interesting, and I could really tell that you yourself are very excited about the new master degrees we can offer. So you can ask right now questions through the Q&A channel. If you scroll over with your mouse over the video, you see this Q&A button. If you press it, you could have some questions, write them down there, and let's wait a little bit because questions have to be thought well, right? But I'm sure James will be happy to answer any question you have regarding the two degrees, of course. Yeah.
If it's about details of cybersecurity, I may fumble a little bit more, but
yeah, James, what a lot of people or students in general ask, and you were already talking a little bit about that, the industry contacts. So you said you had some industry contacts. What are the job potentials that these two master degrees get you?
So in terms of after you graduate from these programs, data science especially is one of the most sought after roles in any kind of major corporation at the moment. People are looking of how can we optimize what we're doing and how can we use data to answer business questions. So you can broadly go into, I would say, any business in the world with a data science master's and easily find a role in something which you can do and contribute. And it's going to sound bad, but it's quite easy to make things work better if you're using these techniques, because a lot of corporate business decision making is usually based less on data and more on gut feeling and tradition, especially on some of the more well-established older businesses, should we say. So I worked in insurance, and insurance, they have lots of numbers and they don't really pay attention to them. They tend to kind of go, yeah, this feels about right. And so bringing data science to that really has a big impact. I know that cybersecurity, especially within the local region, within Germany, they are desperate for cybersecurity experts, absolutely desperate for them, to the point that we're in a fairly sort of old part of Germany. They're more willing to kind of relax German language rules in order to get cybersecurity people in, because they're so desperate for them. So this is a really good opportunity now to get into some of these companies in the local area to use those skills.
So you mean even with just English speaking and no German speaking skills, you could get a job here? Although we're, of course, promoting learning German.
Yes, don't get me wrong. It is better if you speak German. It is easier to speak German. But I've seen jobs advertised which are for cybersecurity, which are really dedicated. They're so desperate for cybersecurity experts, they're willing to basically have people who don't speak German just because they're so keen to have them. So it's obviously better if you have got German language skills, but that's something which can happen.
Oh yeah, I can see you also reading the question. I can read them out loud. So so the first question is, what are the major differences between cybersecurity and data science? So those two programs, what differentiates them?
Well, in terms of academic content, they're completely different fields. There are some realities in terms of, or some differences in terms of, I'm going to start that sentence again. There are some commonalities between them in that there are data science approaches to cybersecurity because we can use data to analyze what's going on in cybersecurity. However, in terms of the field, cybersecurity is all about protecting and guarding and analyzing what's going on within your system, whereas data science is how can we gather data and use it to answer some scientific question. That scientific question could well be a business question because we're just going to do that in a scientific way. Science is just a rigorous way of asking questions. So in terms of the content, they are kind of fairly far apart in terms of computer science background anyway. Data science is basically just maths done very quickly. Is generally the way I look at it. Whereas cybersecurity is much more broad because it takes in so many other sociological views on things and legal views on things, which you don't get through the data science program.
So the second question that came up, Peter, thank you for your question. How are the scholarship programs organized for the master in cybersecurity? And he also asks, when do students work at the company if it's strongly focused on blocks?
So I think I can leave you guys to answer the scholarship stuff. I don't know anything about
it. Yeah.
In terms of if you working within industry, so there are two ways you can do it. Either if you are doing it as part of the master's, i.e. your report, your dissertation, your project at the end, that is over the summer period at the end of the taught program. Some students also, especially if they are within a particular field and there is a demand for it, will work part-time with a company alongside their work, which allows them to then get an insight into how things actually operate and earn a bit of money alongside it. But with a block taught master's, that can be quite intense because data science, cybersecurity in particular, is quite well, master's programs in general are just quite intense. There's a lot brought on quite quickly.
So that leads us actually to the next question, which is a mix of my question I had and the next question, the internship. Is it possible to do an internship while studying data science, for example, at Lancaster University, Leipzig?
So yes, if it's part-time. So there is a limit on the number of hours you can work alongside a degree, which I think is actually set by German immigration law, German visas. I think it's something like 16 hours a week can be worked alongside when you're on a student visa. Don't quote me on that because I'm not an expert in immigration law by any means. But that is something which you can do if you are feeling up to it. When I did my master's, it was one of the most intense years of my life. I probably think it was more intense than my PhD. So it's something which it's certainly possible, but be prepared that that's going to be a lot of work. In terms of employment afterwards, that's a much better situation, particularly if you do your dissertation, your research project with a company. A lot of students, when I've seen that before, will then go on to work with that company afterwards. It's a good foot in the door to then get used to the team. It's kind of like a 3-month interview from their perspective. From your perspective, you get a foot in the door, you get to know the people and whether it's a good fit for you as well.
Very good, very good. So James, you're promoting doing an internship while studying. So you have a really full-time job here in Germany already while studying. So there's another very interesting question. I have been admitted, she says, or the anonymous, as a data science major, and I would like to ask what academic preparations can I make now that the semester starts in October?
I think that depends entirely on your background. If your background is more computer science, I would recommend brushing up on your statistics. And if your background is more mathematics, brushing up on some basic programming skills just to get yourself back into the swing of things. Because when you first arrive, basically the challenging part as you arrive will be whichever one you are weakest on. So if you're a statistician by training, you're going to need to learn how to use a computer really well, and that's going to be quite a bit of work. So being a bit prepared for that is always good. So if you did a maths degree, for example, at some point in there, you probably will have worked with either R or MATLAB. Just being used to that environment again, getting used to working in code, can be really beneficial even at a basic level. And vice versa, if you did, for example, a computer science degree, you can then make sure that depending on what your computer science degree contained, brushing up on your maths and your statistics and your probabilities are then useful just to get back into that way of thinking in terms of distributions, thinking in terms of probabilities. Doing basic puzzles, maths puzzles, are usually a good way of getting on top of that.
Yeah. So the next question, if I have a management degree but learn programming on my own on different courses online and have some work experience, for example, in the field, what was the rest? Will you accept me as data scientist or cybersecurity student?
So that's a complicated question. So when I'm looking at admissions for this, the first thing we're looking for is evidence. So if you've done some programming on your own, we need evidence that you have learnt it to a significant level. Provided we can see that, provided you can demonstrate to us that you are able to do that skill to the level which we need, we're happy to take that as evidence that you can do it. However, just doing a Coursera course and getting the certificate at the end of it isn't that useful because we don't know the level of that particular what's the word? Course. So that might be one of those scenarios where we opt to interview you in order to get a better understanding of your level, and that can then give us a bit more insight into where you may be lacking and where you may be struggling. The other thing is if you did management, I know very little about management, but if there was any statistics in there, that may be sufficient for us to give you entry into the data science masters if there's sufficient statistics at a sufficient level. I know that we did see some candidates who came in with a finance background and there was sufficient there, which was for us to give an offer for data science. For cybersecurity, it's tougher because cybersecurity really require good programming skills. That's the main requirement. Because cybersecurity, because it's block taught, it's not something where you can pick it up as you go and brush up on it. You're going to hit that first module like a wall. And if you don't know how to program, that's going to be a problem. So that's why we have quite a high requirement or a hard requirement on being really good at programming, not just I've done a little bit of it. So data science is more likely to be lenient in that because it's something where we don't expect everyone to have that already, but then you'd need statistics to cover that off.
They'll have a look on case to case, kind of who has the abilities and who doesn't. Sure. And the last question is, it's actually a very common question for all of the studies of the programs we offer here. How many hours of classes per day will we have? So it's a setup which you have, right? And there's no chance to switch courses or classes, but how many hours is it?
So let me think. So for the block taught modules on the cybersecurity, usually you're looking at around 4 hours a day. So you'll have usually a couple of hours in the morning, a break, and then a couple of hours in the afternoon. Depending on the module and how technical it is, it might be that you have 2 hours of lectures in the morning and then 2 hours of labs in the afternoon, or it might be mixed depending on the particular topic. For the semester taught modules in data science, it's a bit more jumbled. It's not going to be as consistent as that each day because it will depend on the timetable, but on average, it will probably work out about the same. So you'll probably have between 3 and 4 hours of contact time per day. One thing which is worth stressing here is that, especially at master's level, we expect you to be doing quite a lot of work outside of that. So we generally recommend to students to treat it like a full-time job, to work consistently from 9 till 5 every day. When they're going to lectures, when they then have a break afterwards, making notes on their lectures, doing that self-study, which is essential to actually reinforce the learning and make sure you actually remember it sufficiently. because each module builds on the previous modules. So if you're missing something in a previous module, that can have a knock-on effect of your understanding in later modules.
So this is where the full-time job comes in, yeah. But
Sure.
that's actually required on all the masters, on all your studies. And as you all studied your bachelor degree, hopefully very successfully, you're used to that, right? So, and they are not all with you, James, right? All the classes. There are other lecturers holding other subjects, right?
I really hope so. Yeah. So while I'm the program director for data science, that's actually more of an administrative role, just coordinating the program, interacting with companies, setting things up, being there to fix any problems. We have a handful of lecturers already, which we've hired specifically for these programs. We just had one start this week. His name's Christoph. He's a statistician by background, so he's not a computer scientist at all. His focus is entirely on statistics. So he is then teaching more of the math side of things rather than the sort of programming side of things. We have a couple new hires on the cybersecurity side in order to bulk up that side of thing. We have Guido, who's the program director for the cybersecurity masters, and a couple of other cybersecurity people. And then on top of that, like I mentioned before, we're bringing in experts for specific modules where, for example, it wouldn't make sense for us to have a full-time member of staff who's dedicated to law because they would only ever teach one module. So what we do instead is we just find an expert and bring them in and hire them for that period. And then part of my role as the program director was be that point of contact and make sure that that's running smoothly with that external person, which means if there's any issues, you can always come to the program director to chat about it, or with my other hat on as teaching lead, kind of one step up in the hierarchy. If there's a problem which the program director can't fix, you can come and talk to me as the teaching lead.
Yeah, and it's a really almost one-to-one supervising. I don't want to say supervising because it's not a supervising thing only, but a one-on-one lead that you and the other lecturers will have together with the students, right? It's a very family feeling, kind of.
Yeah, so the cohorts are quite small, which means you get a lot of contact time with us. It's not like a bachelor's where you may have 400 people in a room for a lecture. We're talking maximum, 15 in a room, absolute maximum, probably more like 5 or 10, which means that it's more of a conversation when you're having a lecture. You can interrupt them and ask them questions and clarifications, and they can adapt the teaching based on what you are on understanding, which is a very different dynamic to any other teaching you're ever likely to have had, unless you've done, I don't know, tutoring or something like that. And having that at this level is really rare. Normally, this will be at the scale of having maybe 100 people on a master's program if you go to a big university. Here, it's so much smaller and so much more intimate. That gives you a very different learning experience and allows you to really get into the depths of what you find interesting as well as what the academic finds interesting.
Yeah, that's. I wanted to emphasize this because some of the students imagine huge student classrooms, which is normal in Germany. Normally, we have those types of classes, but in Lancaster University, Leipzig, it's really a family thing, a family feeling. Last thing I want to emphasize is on the Northwave sponsorship. So there's one sponsorship you could get. You could get to study for free here if you apply to the Northwave sponsorship. It's a company. They really want to sponsor one of our cybersecurity students here. So you can check on our website what they want from you. So they sponsor you, and yeah, just check it out. Maybe you can apply for that. Yeah, James, no more questions left. That says it all. So it was very interesting, very understandable. If I could study again, I would consider it, but I'm not the data type, so I probably leave it to all the interested students out there. Thank you so much for listening. And see you on the next event. There will be the virtual open day on 13th. Just come and check it out virtually, and then hopefully we see each other in October.
Yeah, great.
Thank you so much.
And if anyone has any other lingering questions, my email address was on the slides at the start anyway. Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.